Hello and welcome to the CX Files podcast. I'm your host, Mark Hillary. The CX company has been building virtual assistants and chatbots for 15 years now. They're one of the pioneers of smart chatbots in CX, and their software currently processes over 4 million customer interactions every day. Simon Foote is the UK and Ireland director of the CX company, and he has a history designing CX solutions at the Ember Group and IBM before CX company. I called Simon to catch up on the world of chatbots and automated CX and how it's changing the way that clients of the CX company serve their customers. Okay, Simon, thanks for taking part in the podcast. I think first, before we begin with most of the questions, could you just introduce CX company and your area of focus?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Mark. And it's great to be invited. I've had a look through the back catalogue of CX files, and certainly the great and good in the industry. So I feel privileged to be asked to contribute, actually. So CX company, we are experts in conversational AI. So we've been in the business of building chatbots since 2005. We currently do about 5 million chatbot transactions a day for over 80 customers globally. So our specialism, if you like, is really driving automation through the use of chatbots, which are underpinned by some quite interesting, exciting AI and machine learning type technologies. So it's a bit of a buzz in the industry at the moment, but we're hoping to share our story and our experience of having done it for quite so long, for 15 years or so. So that's our area of expertise.
Okay, excellent. Well, I know that I contacted you because I read a blog on LinkedIn that you wrote about 8 or 9 months ago, and that was talking about some of the specifically new things that you were learning at CX company at the time. What triggered the blog? You know, what was the reason that made you sort of sit down in the middle of last year and write that?
Yeah, it's interesting actually, because I suppose at the time of writing, and to a greater or lesser extent still the same now, is I felt like a bit of an imposter in the software business because, as you know, Mark, my background is one of being in operations in various different shapes and forms, whether that be working in consultancy and working with clients to build target operating models, or whether that's actually running operations. Worked across a number of large organisations, BBC, Camelot, IBM, to name a few. So my background's always really been in operations. It's then sort of turned my hand to becoming one of these dreaded software salespeople within a software business. I felt like I've sort of been let into the inner sanctum and let in on the secrets, really. And I suppose the purpose of the blog was to really kind of help or engage with my network to be able to say, look, I'm on the inside here, understanding the myths and realities of deploying conversational AI, or chatbots as we prefer to call them. So I'm going to find out how real it is. And that's one of the reasons I sort of wanted to work with CX company is, obviously from my position in advising organisations, I could see that the whole world of digital conversations was becoming much more mainstream, and I wanted to have an opinion on it. I wanted to know how real it was, and I wanted to be able to understand the reality of delivering chatbots and conversational AI, to learn the lessons, but also to make sure that we were delivering a quality kind of solution that really helps customers to engage differently with organisations, which has always been a passion of mine in terms of helping organisations to just be better at handling their customer contact. So I guess it was, at the time I had this idea, and I still might come back to it actually, about sort of the man on the inside and how I was, exploring the realities of what happens behind the revolving door of a software business. And a lot of what I set out in there was actually, still quite relevant and, still quite current, really, and I'm sure we can touch on that again in a moment.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, that's exactly what I wanted to ask you, because companies and customers, they do love chatbots when they work really well. So I really wanted to ask you, like, why isn't every brand using them then? The adoption rate does seem to be a bit patchy, and there have been some really poor implementations, where the chatbot gets confused and it's impossible to hand off to a human to help. So what are some of the reasons that we're not seeing more implementations?
Oh, I think you're exactly right, actually. And I suppose with any technology which is kind of going through that hype cycle and, is emerging, you're always going to get bad examples, whether it's the sort of Google stuff where, the robots go rogue and they start serving up answers that, people didn't intend to share or whatever it might be. That's the sort of scare stories that you see out in the networks, really. So I think the reality is, I think Gartner did a report recently on conversational AI, which CX company were recognised as being, one of the leaders in that community. But they researched, I believe the number was over 2,000 chatbot vendors globally. And if you sort of scratch under the surface of that 2,000, pretty much 99% of those 2,000 are nothing more than dynamic FAQs or FAQs in disguise, really. And all they're really doing is using a kind of a branching logic to serve up an answer to a question, a canned answer, which is relatively generic. And more often than not, it doesn't really answer what the customer question actually is, and it doesn't really, get the job done, if you like. So I think, unfortunately, as an industry, we're saddled with too many organisations ticking a box by saying, yep, we do digital, and yep, we do chatbots, when in reality what they've done is just repurposed an already insufficient FAQ and just rendered it slightly differently in like a chatbot window. And I think what we're seeing, and where our successful customers are really kind of leading the way, is they're going far beyond this, right? They're looking to do, when somebody contacts them to say, I'm moving home, how do I move home? One of those sort of FAQ engines will go, yeah, sure, we can help you with that. Contact this number, complete this web form, or email us at movinghome. Whatever it might be. That soon wears very thin, I think, for customers who realise that it's not going to get the job done now. We don't want to do that. What we want to do, and what we are doing, is we're recognising that a customer wants to move home, and we're actually doing it for them. So we would do the ID&V, we would look up into the CRM, we would then push and pull data back into the CRM, and we would then confirm the change of address using various different sort of conversational techniques to do it. But fundamentally, we're actually doing it, right? So I think that's the difference. I think there are not enough organisations out there, potentially not enough good use cases that our customers are able to use yet, in the UK particularly, of where they've trusted a chatbot to actually complete the full transactions. Now, we have a number of customers that we can share and show examples of where we're doing this in retail and public sector and utilities, etc., insurance. But I think principally most companies think they've done bots because they've done FAQs, and I think in 2020 that's going to change significantly, because they'll now see that's not the way to do it, right?
Yeah, and I was thinking about how do you go about training the bot in the first place? Because you must need some knowledge of the most common customer problems you have. And if you haven't got a good FAQ or database of customer problems, then how do you actually do that training process?
Yeah, I think you're right, actually, and I think not many of our customers, in reality, globally, have got the perfect knowledge management systems, right? This is an industry, knowledge management seems to be an industry that's been around for a long time, yet still there are, so many organisations who don't really or haven't really orchestrated their knowledge into a repository which they can access in a way. I mean, many of them have them, but it's in a lockdown infrastructure which they can't get access to, or it's in an intranet which makes it very difficult to serve it up to other sort of technologies that might be able to leverage that knowledge. So, I mean, it is the case that if you want to be successful with conversational AI, of course, you need to have your knowledge archived and articulated in the right way so that you can do that. And we make that very simple and very easy. I mean, whether that's taking training scripts or existing knowledge articles, or even chat logs from web chats, whatever it might be. If we can take all of that, then we can absolutely create a really nice first example of the dialogues. But it doesn't replace the fact for us, and we think this is the right way to do it, is that you need to put the effort in with a human resource to kind of build and validate the Q&As, the questions and answers that you want to have for your customers. I suppose the alternative to that, and this is the work that the likes, there's others in the market would do. I've mentioned one of them earlier. Is you just let the bots crawl your website and then present information to customers, without control. And I suppose that's the other end of the scale. There's not many companies who feel comfortable doing that because you don't know what answer you're going to give to the customer. So the way to avoid that is clearly by putting the time in up front to create the knowledge. Now, where the technology should and does help you, as I'm discovering, is you can create a really good version 1, version 2 even. And then where you need the technology to help you is with identifying the things that you didn't know customers were going to ask, or even getting to the things they have asked that may have a different context or intent behind them that you would not have been able to ordinarily have picked up through a standard FAQ. And that's where we think the future is with regards to how you apply machine learning tactics and technology into these engines, is through that ability to give the human control, but serve up to them the things they didn't know that customers were going to do, so that they can sort of continuously improve the offering that they give to their customers by refining those Q&A journeys. But you're right, you have to put the effort in up front if you want to be successful with these things. But it's an investment. It's an investment. It's a small financial investment, but it's a big investment in terms of the opportunity to transform the way you handle your digital real estate.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm sure that every client is different, but typically how long does it take then to get to version 1?
Well, with examples of building a bot in a day, if it's just for a single journey, which is relatively straightforward, right through to, if we do some quite interesting stuff with Salesforce and other CRMs where we're, like I said before, pushing and pulling data in the case of a change of address, for example, where we're actually able to connect up multiple systems to create a much more personalised journey. And I think to your point earlier about why aren't more people doing it, I think it's because it promises so much in terms of personalisation, but often fails to deliver it because it defaults to a generic sort of service. So having the ability to bring in data from third-party data sources and even clients' own data sources is kind of where there's real opportunity to get the job done. So and that depends. I mean, many of our clients have kind of redeveloping their IT estate so that it's much more API friendly, and they're creating API connectors left, right, and centre, and there's a whole lot of development work happening with a view to being able to plug in third-party technologies like ours to be able to surface and use the data which they already have in their systems, which previously were difficult to unlock and difficult to use. And I think you touched on it earlier, actually, Mark, and I missed the opportunity to mention it, but I think another thing which I saw a lot of, and I'm continuing to do so, is we always get asked the question, what happens when the bot can't answer the question? Can it elegantly hand off to an advisor in whatever way, shape or form that is? And for us, yes, and that's a really, really important part of the solution, because we don't advocate, bots for everything. There are certain, perhaps low volume, but high value, emotionally charged, difficult, human type conversations that still need to happen. So, we can seek to automate some of those, but some of those will still remain the preserve of a human conversation, of course. But where you start a journey in the bot, those that are successful are those that are able to move the customer, if they're unable to complete it in one channel, into another channel and take all of the contact history and data with them. And I think you'll recognise this, but certainly we've been talking about omni-channel as a concept in customer services for certainly at least 10 years, I would say. But omni-channel we've never really been able to do it, and it's never really been that real. It's been an aspiration, I think, although some of the vendors would argue they've created omni-channel solutions for customers. They're often not used. And I think that's because often the digital component, i.e. the online in-app component of the journey, has been missing from that omni-channel journey. And I think when you start looking at technologies like conversational AI, chatbots, actually that's been the missing link, and having those within a digital environment means that, we have now got that element of the customer journey catered for, and therefore our job becomes making sure that data and that customer journey can be elegantly migrated from one service to another. And that includes things like with examples of us queuing into a queue for a callback. So call me back now, and we'll take some details from the customer and we'll put them in an ACD and into an outbound dialer and create an outbound call from a website using a chatbot. But we're doing it having pre-validated the customer and perhaps even skill-based routed them based on what they're asking. And that to me is where omnichannel starts to happen. So I'm excited by the opportunity of 2020 to really start delivering some omnichannel solutions if we think seriously about how we integrate bots into our wider customer management suite, which is now much, much easier to do.
Yeah, that's good to hear, because it has certainly been just aspirational for a lot of companies. And I know one of the other big problems that many of the contact center providers have found is that they have a sort of traditional charging model that goes back for years now, and it's based generally on contact center calls. And the sort of technology that you're delivering can completely deflect customer from interacting with a brand. If they can resolve their issue with the bot, then all those KPIs about call length and first call resolution and all that stuff are completely useless. So are you redesigning KPIs then?
Well, so I think, we are seeing a real emergence of new KPIs. Honestly, some of that we're driving because we've got access to new sets of data which customers never had before, and some of that is being driven by our clients who are actively using, chatbots as part of their customer management estate, and therefore, they need to measure performance as well. So we're seeing, we've one customer who uses an SLA called help ratio, and that is the number of people who've gone onto their website, who've gone to the FAQ page, but then have dropped out to speak to an advisor. So what is the percentage of people who were looking for help who ended up going on to contact an advisor? And previously they would measure that as how many people were phoning up a discrete number. You've gone through a journey online, you've got to contact us, you phoned a discrete number, and that number is then tagged as being the FAQ number from the website, so they could count essentially how many people had fallen out of the web channel and gone into an advisor to speak to an advisor. If we can, as this customer are doing, they're actually monitoring how many people are actually going on the website to seek help who then don't go on to contact an advisor, having given feedback that they got the answer they wanted, and they call that the help ratio. And they've seen, for this particular customer, they've seen a massive reduction in the number of customers having to contact them purely by putting a chatbot within the customer journey, and they do that in Facebook Messenger and in WhatsApp and elsewhere as well, but purely by just intervening at the right point in time with knowledge and information which is more personalised and relevant to the customer, but also is allowing for a conversation. And that's right at the heart of this is, you can make some assumptions about what a customer wants, but inevitably they want something we haven't predicted. And therefore that ability to kind of change the dynamic or change the direction of that conversation based on what the customer really wants to do is really exciting and really interesting. We've got other customers who are looking at, obviously, we've got the traditional kind of customer feedback measures. So, whether that's direct feedback in terms of asking somebody if, we answered the question, or that's everything we can help them with today, or asking for an NPS rating or whatever it might be. We also look at things like completion rates. So how many people started a bot journey and completed that bot journey, giving positive feedback, so we know how successful we've been at answering the question. Recognition rates is interesting as well. So we look at things like on how many occasions have we been able to identify the question and the reason for the question that the customer had to be able to then give the right answer. And the recognition rate then is, did we recognise it, but actually, did we give them the right answer? So something like a recognition rate is becoming quite an interesting SLA for people as well. And what we're also seeing, which is quite good, is how do you take the operation on the journey with you? So we've customers who would put the bot assistant or the bot transactions or the chatbot agents performance up on the wallboards, so they can see how many contacts have been successfully handled by the bot in a day versus an agent versus the email queue or whatever it might be. So making the chatbot feel part of the wider team is a good thing, and obviously that it helps agents to focus on the stuff they do brilliantly, which is the more complex, emotionally charged conversations, which requires more intelligence or emotional intelligence or problem solving skills, and leaving the lower value, higher volume stuff to the robots who can just take that stuff away from the front line, which traditionally has been the boring grunt work that they didn't want to do anyway, right?
Yeah, exactly. And that's an interesting approach as well, kind of integrating the bot into the team as well. I mean, if you were looking back at the blog that you wrote about 9 months ago, what are the things that have changed since then? And what are you looking at as we sort of go into 2020 now?
Well, so the thing that's really, and I touched on it in the blog, was this feels very much like the chatbot industry back then felt very much like the early days of the speech IVR industry. And we all kind of knew that there was an opportunity to automate voice in a way, but we started slowly and we gave it a go and we piloted it. And there were some horrendous examples out there, and there still are, sadly, of really poorly deployed speech IVRs. Now, what seems to have happened over the last 6 to 9 months is the rise of the voice bot. And the voice bot is essentially a speech IVR. And what we're readying ourselves for and already delivering and piloting is if you have the knowledge management layer, which for us is our digital CX product, that's the sort of platform from where we put in all of the customer questions and answers and have all of the sort of connections into all the different channels. The principle would be that you would want one knowledge management layer, which you would want all of your channels to be able to tap into. So you might build that knowledge management layer to be able to serve a text-based chatbot on a website. Pops up in the corner, you answer the question, gets it done. But actually, the future is, and this is near future, this is now, is can we use that same knowledge management layer to power our speech IVRs or our voice bots? So a customer comes in on a phone line, they ask a question, that gets converted from speech to text, goes into your knowledge management and serves up the answer, gets converted back from text to speech, and you're in the IVR. So now we're in the world of being able to have one restaurant, many kitchens. One kitchen, many restaurants, as the phrase goes. So you build it once, and then you serve it up across multiple different channels. So that use of voice suddenly becomes very interesting, and becomes an extra layer to this industry. And I think obviously then you start thinking about what is the future of some of the smart devices, the Google Homes, the Alexas of this world, and we're already able to serve up kind of instructions within those environments. And I think the challenge with those has typically been that you have to change your language to be able to communicate with them. Hey Siri, I want to, rather than speaking in natural language. Now, clearly with something like a chatbot conversational AI platform, it's very much in the customer's language. That's the value it brings. So therefore, that ability to just understand the customer in the language they choose to use across whatever platform they're coming to you on is really interesting. So it's similar to the speech IVR world still, in that we're still sort of slow to embrace. But I think the potential there is becoming quite real, and the majority of customers we're talking to are already thinking about that future of how we integrate with voice as well, because they see that that's the opportunity to build that knowledge once and then serve it up across multiple channels.
Thanks for listening to the CX Files podcast. Please take a moment to review the podcast, because this helps other listeners to find it. And if you have any suggestions, then get in touch with me on Twitter or LinkedIn. I'm @Mark Hillary with 2 L's, or just search Google for Mark Hillary.